YouTube. Looking today at the issue of guitar finishes and the various ways in which you will see damage develop on them that can tell you a lot about the finish. So our roster today, we're going to start with the impetus behind this video, which was I've been working on an early 90s Peavey Predator, and some of the questions about the kind of finish that it had and the choices that I made about how to deal with it. This was the start of it all. But today we're going to do some comparisons looking at different guitars. And so here's the roster that we're going to go through. We're going to start with that early 90s Peavey. Then we're going to look at a 2020s Nashville Guitar Works, a small guitar studio, not well known, lower budget level guitars, but it has a Nitro, hand Nitro finish. And so we're going to look at that. We're going to see how alcohol affects it. We're also going to look at a 2005 Squier Affinity Strat with the very hard, brittle sort of finish. Still beautiful, but more of a coating than true paint in the traditional sense. Then we're going to go back to a 94 Mexican Fender Telecaster and look at some of the nicks and bruises that it had, because it also has a hard coat, but you can see the quality difference there. Then we're going to fast forward to 2021 with a Godin Stadium. This is a Telecaster style, and this is a satin, not quite an open pore, but a satin finish. And so we're going to look at the particularities of that sort of a finish. And then we're going to resolve with an American-made G&L ASAT Classic Bluesboy and look at the upper echelons in terms of much better poly finishes, still with that hard coating, but of a different level. So stay tuned, and we're going to go through these different finishes today on our Guitar Finish Roundup. So let's begin with this early 90s Peavey Predator, US built Peavey Predator. I'm not going to say a whole lot about it because you can see my remarks about the I kind of went back and forth. Is this Nitro, is this poly? And as we'll talk about in a little bit, looking at the next guitar, the Nitro guitar, Shredder Shane 240 had a great tip about using alcohol, isopropyl alcohol, to test it. Now this is not something you want to do on a fine guitar where it's not unblemished, but on a beater like this, checked it, sure enough it's poly. It did a very good job mimicking, however, the way that Nitro feels, the sort of coats that they put on it, the way that it vintaged in the sun. It feels and looks a lot like Nitro. You can tell that they were with the much thinner coats, going for that sort of a feel, but on a more budget level. And it also resists chemicals better. It's not going to wear as easily as Nitro, but damages in quite a similar way, where you see that the paint has truly bonded into the wood, and the edges of it can be smoothed down and sanded down relatively flat, which is what I've been doing to it. And so that's our first finish in the Guitar Finish Roundup. Alright, looking at guitar number 2. This one I pulled out particularly because of the sort of finish that it has. Now this is a not well known Nashville Guitar Works Telecaster style. It's hard to capture in the camera with this lighting. It's not coming through. It looks on the camera more cream. It is a very bright yellow. It's very bright yellow, but you can immediately see that it is not a full gloss poly. Now this, I've waxed it well, so it's got a nice sheen to it, but it is not a full gloss poly. You can immediately feel that. Now what is it? Now this was marketed as a Nitro guitar. It was, I believe, built in China but finished in America, and at least that's what they claimed. Now after I unboxed it, I noticed this had probably been sitting on a shelf or sitting on a display for a while, and there is some wrinkles in the paint, some little pimples here and there, it's very minor overall, but things that with careful looking and feeling you will begin to notice. And so the idea that was posed to me about checking with alcohol, I tested this by putting a little bit on this area here and just starting to work it in by hand and feel what it was doing. And with just a little bit of working, now it's not like it's just rubbing off like you know, it's washable paint or anything. But you'll notice that as the alcohol gets worked into it, I can kind of dig into it with my thumbnail. There's a softness there that wasn't there, that isn't up here. This is nice and hard. The bit that I just hit with alcohol, just a little bit softer. And so I might go against my general rule. I don't typically artificially relic guitars, but this one is low price enough and has that nitro finish, so I might do some limited relicking on this. I just haven't decided. But this is a good example of a lower level nitro. It's still overall nice paint job and something that you would not expect on a guitar in this price range, but still not as nice as I have a 89 G&L Signature S500 in mint condition, nitro finish, and which I'm not about to start rubbing alcohol on it. That thing is beautiful. I only bring it out just every now and then to feel the greatness of it, and then it goes back in its box. But this one I didn't mind putting a little alcohol on it, testing that theory, and I might even do some mild relicking on it, just haven't decided yet. Alright, next up in our roundup is this 2005 Chinese-made Squier Stratocaster. This is an Affinity level. Overall, I mean, it's quite a nice guitar considering the price. Considering the price, it plays well and so forth. But this one, you can see all the nicks and bruises that have happened to it resolve in paint chunks flaking off. It doesn't ding, it doesn't dimple or anything, it just breaks off. And that's very, very typical of this fast coated where they just bake it on really fast. Now, the quality of the finish in terms of the aesthetics, it's quite beautiful. It's very well done. Considering that this probably did not take a huge amount of time, they did a great job with this factory finish. But damage over time shows what kind of a finish, and that this is not really a high quality finish, even if it's quite fetching visually. Alright, next up in our roundup is my workhorse Telecaster. This is a 1994 Mexican-made Telecaster, which I just adore. I love it. I love the way that it feels, the way that it plays. It's a wonderful, wonderful instrument. Here's a good example of moving up to more of an intermediate level polyurethane coating, because this has been around and played enough and handled enough that it has some damage. There is some damage, just some little teeny nicks and bruises here and there. But you'll notice this is a great example. You see how the paint is actually, at least to an extent, bonding with the wood. And so as I buffed this down and did some mild sanding just so it'd be smooth to the touch, and you can see that the black is actually soaked into the wood. And just generally speaking, this damage is more minimal, even though it probably was dropped harder than that Squier we just looked at, because the coating is of a higher quality, it probably cured longer and was better applied, and so we're moving up a level. And so again, damage tells you a lot about the finish, and looking at this one, this is a quality, solid guitar that, you know, it's got a couple little bruises on it, and it just, you know, has no problem with them. Alright, next up we're going to look at a very different type of finish. This is on a beautiful recent Godin Stadium. This is after they closed their New Hampshire factory and moved all production back to Canada, but beautiful, beautiful. I'm going to do a video on this guy. Absolutely beautiful, particularly this cut. Woo! Oh, it's just so nice. It is so nice. And this is a good example of a natural finish. You can see that the wood grain shows through and has a beautiful, deep, chestnutty sort of stain on it, but it is a satin finish. It's not stained and then coated with a thick coating of poly like we've seen on some of the other guitars, including that Fender. Right. This is not quite an open pour, as in it's all sealed, but it is sealed with a thinner coat of satin. And so I don't have any significant damage on this. This guitar is just about mint. Absolutely beautiful guitar. Plays fantastically, and that finish is just beautiful. Beautiful. I'm going to do a video on this later, and we'll talk about how well this body was crafted. Many, many wonderful things to say about this guitar. But in terms of finish, the good thing about this, if something strikes it, there is no paint in the strictest sense to break off or discolor, and so you're not going to see any of that. If you gouge deep enough, you'll probably get under the stain, and you'll start seeing more of the unstained natural wood color. But the problem with it is simply that it's much more prone to small scratches. In fact, if you take your fingernail and really dig it in, it will leave a little dimple. So it's not nearly as hard as those coated polyurethane finishes that we've been looking at. So it's not as durable in that regard, but damage will not be nearly as apparent unless it's catastrophic. And if it's catastrophic, then too late. But in terms of day-to-day wear, this is more prone to scratches and little nicks and dents, but you will not see the sort of paint damage that you've seen in the colored polyurethanes. Alright, for our last guitar in our guitar finish roundup, we're going to look at this absolutely gorgeous 2007 Fullerton made G&L ASAT classic Bluesboy. Ooh, just this guitar is absolutely stunning in this finish. Absolutely stunning. This metallic, deep blue, beautiful cut body. Oh, just gorgeous. Gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous finish. And this guitar, it does not show its age, first of all. You see, it's, I don't know, working on 20 years old here, and yet just beautiful. And it's been used quite a bit. The pick guard, let's see if I can you can see the discoloration right there on the pick guard. This has been played quite a lot. It's not just like something that sat on a shelf, but the finish on this is absolutely beautiful. Every corner, every bit has been just beautifully polished, and it is, I mean, a stunning metallic finish. There is one little bit of damage, which I assume occurred during an intonation gone wrong, where probably a screwdriver, took it right there. Oh, it's so hard to even get in there to see it. Oh, it's right there. It's a little nick. I'm gonna pick you up. Sorry. Dude, there it is. There's the tiny little bit. That's the one tiny little bit of damage on here. And so tiny, and it probably took a reasonable amount of force hitting it like that, but it's still, even though this is hard, very hard coated, and it just chipped a tiny bit, and a tiny little flake chipped off of it, but it did not want to come unglued. And you can see, looking deep down in the chip, that you can see the grain of the wood in what was chipped off, and that means that the paint really not just sits and adheres to the top, but was soaking into that wood. And so this is, as to be expected of G&L, US made G&L especially, fantastic finish. But this is a great example of a hard shell polyurethane finish that is not cheap or junk or gonna break and, you know, shatter into the wind. This sucker is hard, and it is resistant and beautiful. Oh my gosh, look at those curves. Gorgeous, gorgeous guitar. So thanks for hanging with me for this roundup. I might do some follow-up videos just adding some characters to this roster. I've got some other older guitars with some damage that can give us some insights. But thank you for watching. Just trying to get this channel going, so liking, subscribing, doing all that jazz really helps out a lot. You have a blessed day. Thank you.